Good evening and welcome to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first on 93 WIBC. Tons of news. Glad that you're joining us, whether you're joining us via the TV side, the radio side, of course, our lovely friends on the live stream portion, or the podcast. On this Wednesday, July the 1st, Q2 is over. We're getting ready for the 4th of July. It's getting ready to be the 250th anniversary. And so we are cramming as much news as possible in just before it. So without further ado, the Department of Justice, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and the State Department, as well as the Department of Homeland Security, have launched a major initiative to go after terrorists who are not only trying to influence political outcomes in the United States, which involves more the State Department side of things, but also several arrests and convictions of Tren de Aragua and other gang members. There are new declarations for foreign terrorist organizations, as well as international actors attempting to move billions of dollars in and out of Iran through China and cryptocurrency exchanges. So first of all, in a Fox News digital story by James Cerrone, Secretary Marco Rubio detained 3 Cuban nationals, including a man that the Trump administration says spent more than a decade working for a Cuban government influence organization here in the United States. The State Department announced that Carlos Antonio Lloga Dominguez, his wife and son, are in federal custody pending removal from the United States. So this is the guy, this is the man, and the political influence network from Communist Cuba, who, in cooperation with Neville Roy Singham, who we talked about earlier this week, who's also under Department of Justice investigation for peddling influence from Communist China, this Cuban influencer organization, which was run by this Dominguez individual, is the crew that brought Code Pink and Hassan Piker to Cuba, not only in an attempt for a big, huge social media stunt, but to try to break the U.S. blockade against the communist regime, and who might have actively supplied both economic relief and military materials, as well as infrastructural materials like solar panels, not to Cuban hospitals that were supposedly in the dark, but to the actual regime, military, and government facilities themselves. This statement from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, quote, "For decades, the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the People." Aww. Yeah, it's an organization of friendship and love and hugs and wonder. Anyway, ICAP, again, Institute Cuban Friendship with the People, has been a vehicle for radical left-wing extremism and subversive foreign influence in the United States and across our hemisphere. ICAP is the Cuban regime's premier influence and intelligence front group. That brings up something called HM01 or Hotel Mike 01. Otherwise known as the famous Cuban number station. So for the younger folks, if you've ever played the Call of Duty Black Ops game, Mason, where are the numbers? That's what that's referencing. If you are older than the age of 40 and you don't recognize that reference, you remember the Cold War era number stations. This is directly connected with Cuban espionage, broadcasting diplomatic messages and straight up Cold War spy stuff into the United States. So anyway, exploiting its vast global network to spy on Americans, promote anti-Western propaganda, coordinate foreign influence operations, and organize revolutionary leftist movements around the world. Again, one of the reasons that Cuba was panicking when Maduro was plucked out of Venezuela is that it severely crippled Cubans' operations in South America, and therefore China's operations in South America. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. That would be the president talking about the Panama Canal with the Rough Riders today. I continue. Earlier this month, I designated ICAP and several other Cuban organizations responsible for engaging in subversive anti-American activities pursuant to sanctions authorities created by President Trump's Cuba executive order. This week, I terminated the legal status of Carlos Antonio Lloga Dominguez, a former ICAP official who maintains ties with the organization. Lloga Dominguez and his wife and son are now in federal custody pending removal from the United States. This is the key here. America will never become home for foreign communists who peddle propaganda, run subversive influence operations, or support radical anti-American movements within the United States. Transact with ICAP and you will be sanctioned, prosecuted, or deported from our country. And that last bit is leveled directly at Hassan Piker. Because again, this is the individual who said, oh, I'm not a terrorist, I'm not a subversive, and then wants to come out and say, and for example, the wing of the Colorado Socialists, Marxists, and Open Communists winning primaries in Colorado last night, he says, hey, socialism, it's coming to a neighborhood near you. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was making it clear there are far more levers, far and away, more levers of power for the United States to exercise against foreign influence via communism and socialism than relying on Congress to wake up from its eternal nap or the Supreme Court of the United States to be batting 1,000. Because the United States, via the Supreme Court and Congress, has already given the presidential administration and, for example, the State Department, the complete and plenary authority to say, communism, get out, or we'll rip you to shreds. Now, that also has to do a little bit with USAID of all things and what people are upset about. But first, Code Pink, in what I can only assume is response, also an organization that is a foreign influence operation from China, Neverroy Singham, also decided to hold a rally at the Capitol yesterday.
I've been to Cuba twice, and more recently on the flotilla, delivering humanitarian aid, and I saw the increased devastation of the island since my time there in 2022.
Now again, she points out, she says, oh, we're there just delivering humanitarian aid. Code Pink has refused to turn over any manifest to the United Nations Human Rights Council, which is a sham and a joke, but they won't even turn over the manifest to the UN. They won't turn over the manifest, of course, to the United States. They won't turn over the manifest to several other watchdog organizations like the American Red Cross or the Red Crescent, even. There are all of these organizations that are saying, well, show us what humanitarian aid you delivered and we'll credit it to your moral account. And they won't turn over the manifest because they didn't just deliver a ton of humanitarian aid to the people of Cuba. They were delivering solar panels so that in the times of an oil shortage, the Cuban regime could still communicate with China.
Cuba has taught us what solidarity is.
Okay.
They've created alternative systems to address crisis, whether economic, to climate, to healthcare.
Yes, Cuba, the ultimate savior for global climate change competition. Yes, the economy and the industry that runs on oil, that has never built any other kind of alternative energies except for solar panels tacked on roofs, like third world countries in sub-Saharan Africa.
Cuban healthcare workers are known for their medical innovations and for training and deploying doctors around the world.
Only these doctors they've deployed around the world just so happen to forget the supposed cancer and Alzheimer's cures that Cuba's already developed and had for years. You know, the socialists of Cuba, Bernie says, with their cures for Alzheimer and for cancer and also for probably erectile dysfunction. I'm very excited about that one, Bernie Sanders. They have them, but apparently when the doctors get placed outside of Cuba, all of a sudden the amnesia, I don't know, maybe the Alzheimer, cure wears off, and then just, it's gone. They totally forget it. It's almost as if those are all big socialist shams to sell you nothing, like socialism does all the time.
The U.S. sends bombs. Cuba sends doctors and nurses. And yet this administration has pressured other countries to expel Cuban healthcare workers.
Oh, no.
The most cruel recent U.S. policy is starving Cuba of oil.
By the way, one of the doctors, remember I talked about the number stations thing earlier? There were a series of espionage arrests in the early 2010s, and that would be under President Barack Obama. And at that time, some of the doctors and nurses just so happened to be feeding information about the entrances to certain U.S. financial institutions and the embassies of other countries that Cuba was expected to be participating in espionage here in the United States. So, for example, some of these individuals who were doctors and nurses were trying to find architectural plans of the Ecuadorian embassy so that Cuba might be able to sneak someone into the embassy in Ecuador in Washington, D.C., and then subvert and carry out communist regime operations in South America.
Cuba produces only about 40% of the crude oil it needs.
Well, it sounds like it sucks to suck. So they had a big, huge whining fest. They're very, very upset about things. Things aren't going very well at all for the Cuban regime. Yesterday at the Capitol, we joined National Nurses United. Health partners, and then, of course, members of Congress to demand an end to the blockade on Cuba. Now, again, this does come at a particular time for a particular reason. We're going to get into that over on the live stream. Radio crew, so sorry, the FCC says, I got to send you to a commercial break, but YouTube doesn't. YouTube.com/Daily Signal if you don't want to wait. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. Now, to you fine friends of ours over on the live stream, why is all of this occurring now? Because on Cuba, the Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez announced that talks between Cuba and the U.S. are at a standstill. Why? Because even though the Cuban totally free legislature that you're not actually allowed to elect, there's only one person up for that office for every single position. It's kind of like a New York Democratic, congressional seat. Anywho, these individuals approved a bunch of free market reforms. Well, then the Cuban regime stepped in and said, hold on a minuto, let's wait a second, and started stalling things. So now you get all of the humanitarians out there saying, oh no, the U.S. is going to stomp. So you do have a little bit of trolling that is occurring. Not only because the president of the United States and his cabinet, or many of them, visited the presidential library of my favorite U.S. president, Teddy Roosevelt, today. Stephen Miller, ever the troll, as the deputy White House chief of staff, posted this picture over on social media of Teddy Roosevelt at age 39 in Cuba. Quote, the U.S. declared war on Spain in 1898 after a series of violent incidents in Spain's colony of Cuba, including the explosion of the USS Maine in Havana's harbor. The government called for volunteers to bolster its small military of only 28,000 men. Teddy Roosevelt immediately resigned as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy to establish the first U.S. volunteer cavalry regiment, famously known as the Rough Riders. And that brings us to the President of the United States himself showing up today with the Rough Riders and, well, for lack of a better term, saying that communism must be kept out of South America and must be kept out of the Caribbean, for example, like the Panama Canal, which also carries significant importance regarding USAID we'll have to touch on later, right in front of the Rough Riders. Gotta keep the damn commies out of Cuba and Panama and out of South America.
So we gave it away. The first thing they did, you know what they did? They raised the prices for the ships by 4 times.
I'll start that clip over. His audio was really, really low.
The Panama Canal, so we gave it away. The first thing they did, you know what they did? They raised the prices for the ships by 4 times. And they didn't lose one ship. And then they raised it again twice. And they didn't lose one ship. All they did is make tremendous amounts of money for years and years. How stupid was that?
Yeah, Jimmy Carter is kind of retarded. No disagreement there.
And now China is trying to take over the Panama Canal, and we're not going to let that happen, okay?
Now, this is an announcement at the end. China's Belt and Road Initiative is severely struggling. But however, the birth tourism plan of the Chinese Communist Party continues. It does. It continues to this day and is now strengthened by the Supreme Court's interpretation, or should I say 5 members of the Supreme Court's interpretation of the 14th Amendment. So if you have a child in the United States, even if you and your spouse are both Chinese citizens, and then as soon as that child is born and therefore is granted American citizenship, you then take them back to China to be raised in China for 18 years, according to a Supreme Court decision in 1967, and then again the Supreme Court decision yesterday, this year of our Lord 2026, then that American citizen, though raised and pledging allegiance to China, cannot have their birthright citizenship stripped away from them. That brings us over to Attorney General Todd Blanche on the United States trying to tackle birth tourism from the DOJ side.
From a Department of Justice standpoint, it's obviously focusing our prosecutors and our law enforcement partners on birthing tourism, and it's a booming industry, and it will continue. It will continue given the Supreme Court's decision yesterday. There's other things that DHS can do and the federal government can do in the visa process and the application process to try to minimize or limit the opportunity of folks coming here to not to visit and not to do what they're saying they're doing on their tourist visa, but just to have a baby that can then be a U.S. citizen. So from our standpoint,
the Attorney General, the soon-to-be Attorney General, currently the acting Attorney General of the United States, Todd Blanche, is doing more in orienting the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security with Mark Wayne Mullen as well as the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You see Kash Patel on the screen. Now, if you're on the radio crew just joining us back from your commercial break, you don't see him. But picture a small, swarthy, somewhat Indian man looking in full agreement with the Attorney General of the United States. That would be Kash Patel of the FBI. So this entire DOJ apparatus is now shifting its focus to targeting not just the fraud that, for example, we're going to talk about later with Health and Human Services, with Dr. Oz, with the Vice President J.D. Vance, but also into focusing in thwarting foreign operations in the United States through birth tourism.
It's focusing on what is a problem. So everybody should agree that it's a violation of our laws if your intent in coming here, if you're pregnant, is to have a child to become a United States citizen because of our now laws. And so what we have to do as the Department of Justice is make sure our agents, our HSI agents that we work with and the FBI are focused on stopping that. And that's what
there is a big difference between someone getting up in front of the podium and ranting and raving and getting really passionate and emotional and saying, we're not going to stand for it and we're going to fight and we're going to win and we're going to whatever. When you hear Secretary of State Marco Rubio, when you hear Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, when you hear, rarely as it is, Susie Wiles, the White House Chief of Staff, when you heard Tulsi Gabbard step up to her podium when she was the Director of National Intelligence, and many other members of the administration, Linda McMahon, of course, Harmeet Dillon, other maverick members who were kind of soft-spoken and were less focused on just giving a showy press conference, but said, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to accomplish it, you end up seeing quite a few things that are carried through successfully. Case in point, Mark Wayne Mullen, a little more soft-spoken and not as ranty and ravey and showboaty as Kristi Noem was during her tenure as the director of the Secretary of Homeland Security. You have 8 illegal alien Tren de Aragua gang members, which were charged, because this isn't just Cuba. It isn't just kind of foreign influence on the high-level intelligence side. It's also on the brute force side of things.
We are here today because 8 allegedly illegal alien members of Tren de Aragua foreign terrorist organization are being charged with vicious kidnappings and murders in separate cases out of Texas and Illinois. These violent murders should never have occurred in the first place because these men should have never been allowed in our country.
Now, this brings us over to kind of the general response, because these are wins for the American people. Obviously, birther tourism, it's a very serious issue. The Democrat side of the aisle is trying to downplay it, pretend that, first of all, it doesn't exist. And then if they pretend that it doesn't exist, that sort of gets them past the graveyard. That's on the corporate side of things. So first, we'll take a look at kind of the old corporate, the establishment Democrats. Here's Senator Ed Markey trying to suggest that this doesn't happen, or it's so rare. It's like the Laken Riley Act. Well, sure, maybe there are young women that are being assaulted and raped and beaten and murdered, but it's so rare, probably. That's the Senator Ed Markey of Mass doing the Mass whole thing.
Talk about what we saw this week from the Supreme Court just hours after yesterday's birthright citizenship ruling came down. The Trump Justice Department directed prosecutors to target, quote, birth tourists or foreign nationals who arrive in the United States pregnant and give birth here. They are not satisfied by what they got yesterday from the Supreme Court. They are not going to stop simply because the Supreme Court says that birthright is in fact constitutional.
Get to the point, hon.
What the Justice Department is suggesting actually look like in practice, and what can you do to push back?
Stellar journalism by MS now. Don't get me wrong. I understand sometimes you got to lead the guest, but come on, man. Just let the dude answer.
This is just a continuation of the Trump administration attempts to make America great again by making America hate again. What they did last Friday in the Supreme Court decision, saying that 350,000 Haitians have to leave our country and its protections in order to go back to a country where our American citizens are told it's too dangerous to go.
So he basically says it doesn't exist at all. He continues on for the next 2 minutes, dribbling and dribbling about how, well, this is just like hate toward the Haitians. Again, 2 individuals who take a specific assignment from Beijing. There are literal agencies advertising this in China. The advertisements, they are on the World Wide Web. Mandarin's a little hard to read, but it's up there. Google Translate does in fact exist. And they advertise that if you have 2 Chinese individuals They will send you to the United States by pairs, but 2 pregnant women to the United States. You will then have your child at a Chinese adjacent facility, meaning a facility close by to kind of observation, kind of tracking by the Chinese Communist government, because they're absolutely operating in California. You don't need to hear it from me. Hear it from all of the individuals who've been charged in the California government for collaborating in cooperation with China. It's insane. And then after the kid is born, they bring them back to Beijing, and now you have a free person with Chinese allegiance that is an American citizen. Now, that brings us over to a couple of the other big arrests before we move on to kind of the socialist response to all of this, which is, again, patently insane. On the Iranian and crypto side of things, in April, the U.S. seized $1 billion in cryptocurrency exchange tokens from the Iranian regime. And that piece of news snagged my attention because the Department of Homeland Security, the National Security Agency, a lot of different organizations on the intelligence side have been on a fight with the dark web for a very long time. Cryptocurrencies are a little bit of a part of that. But what confused me at the time was what cryptocurrency exchanges are already hosting huge amounts of Iranian regime exchange, because this would be a means of bypassing the sanctions. You know that under the JCPOA, no one was supposed to do any violating. Oh, gee, that happened about 5 seconds after that Obama-era deal was signed. More than $3.84 billion, according to the Wall Street Journal, has allegedly been moved through the Chinese exchange CoinEx to Iran, while $1.5 billion was moved through the cryptocurrency exchange Bybit. And this is just in the last year. So of turnaround, seizing $1 billion and then over $5 billion in cryptocurrency exchange being funneled through China and other international exchanges to the Iranians. It's a serious problem. Also, for some of those watchdog individuals like Edward Snowden, who claimed to just be purer than the driven snow, he absolutely, and others knew this was going on and said nothing. Because again, he, like a lot of other quote unquote libertarian, free speech, free dark web or individuals, are simply foreign assets that are just anarchists, for that record. Now, there is another major DOJ arrest to talk about before we start talking about some of the socialists here at home who have yet to be arrested. This would be an arrest by the Department of Justice of Catherine Beth Washburn of New York for attempting to send $30,000 in crypto to Islamic terror organizations. Now, of course, she's taken all of the photos of herself with like grenades and then the Islamic base prayer kind of like flag behind her. And, very, very exciting. Here she is. Again, she's yet another basic white girl who's been swayed into thinking that Islam is the place for rights and advancing socialism. The strangest of bedfellows they are. So, big arrests that are happening continuously. Now, there's another update regarding Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida. The Florida cabinet officially designating Antifa and the Muslim Brotherhood, as well as the Council of American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, as terrorist organizations under a law that took effect today, July the 1st. We don't have a ton of time to talk about this because we do have to get to the socialists, the communists over here at home, and a wild Republican rebound that maybe some weren't expecting. I don't know. I kind of called this a while ago. So radio crew, we're going to send you over to the commercial break while we dive into some of this socialist wackadoodleness. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. Now, while the radio crew is away, we will in fact play. So, Pramila Jayapal of Washington, she says, hey, you know what? Maybe we had a lot of socialists refuse to deny being communists, winning in New York and in California and in other elections across the country right now in Michigan. El Sayed, who is a nutcase progressive and, again, pro-Islamist, pro-socialist, looks to be set to win the Michigan Democratic primary in August. Graham Plattner is fighting for his life in Maine. We'll get to that in a minute. In Colorado, Attorney General Phil Weiser defeated U.S. Senator Michael Bennet, a more progressive individual, in the Democrat primary for governor. For U.S. Senate, incumbent John Hickenlooper defeated State Senator Julie Gonzalez, who was the projected winner. That's kind of a slight upset. And that matters in a second because a Hickenlooper staffer is basically running out to anyone that'll listen and saying, oh, dear God, we're in so much trouble with the socialists. But alas, I'll get to that. In the House elections, things get really wild. So Melat Kiros, a Democratic socialist, labor rights activist, upset the longtime incumbent Representative Diana DeGette. Now, some are calling this a major surprise. You are not surprised about this. You're not. None of you out there are surprised with the insanity, because she got out there and she said the same kind of stuff that all of them do, that render everything we just talked about in the first section of the show a thing of the past if they get a majority in Congress, or if they are the mayor of New York City, which we'll also get to.
Like, abolishing ICE is just one step, right? Democrats have been in power multiple times over the last few decades and did nothing to address the immigration reform that we have.
I have an opposite who I normally debate on Tuesdays. His name's Mike Leon. He's a wonderful guy. And there is a Democrat strategist line that he was talking about on the show. He's more of a centrist than a Democrat. But he was talking about this Democrat line where the best defense from the DNC right now is, sure, these people are insane and they're radical, but I'm sure they'll moderate once they get into Congress. I'm sure they'll moderate once they become mayor of New York City. So here she is claiming she's going to do all of these things, but the promise is, well, they're going to moderate. It'll be okay. We'll find out. So abolish ICE, abolish police.
ICE expenditures, increase spending.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think there has to be an immediate pathway for every single undocumented immigrant that's here in this country today that does not require them to shell out thousands of dollars to go through the process, for it to take decades at a time to be able to get to citizenship. Oh,
and unlimited amnesty. Everyone gets to be a citizen no matter what. Bring them all in. No prisons. Zoran Mamdani is attempting and succeeding in attempting to close Rikers Island, getting rid of the prisons. I mean, even though, which is really hilarious, the actual candidates, once they get into office, are more vocal than the actual chair of the Democratic Socialists of America, who, when Will Cain over at Fox, good friend of the show, asked the chair of the Democratic Socialists of America if they wanted to abolish all prisons and police, he just refused to answer the question.
Do you support doing away with police and prisons?
We want safety for everybody. So safety from us doesn't come from just investing in more and more militarized police and prisons.
So it doesn't just mean that we invest more and more in really bad thing, military super police.
The data shows that when you take care of people economically, crime goes down.
Oh, yes. If you just go up and give everyone a hug, like from the Cuban Institute of Love, Hugs, and Friendship, then all of the sudden, the sky opens up, the clouds roll back, and we're just in the wonderful land of make-believe. Ah, yes. Wonderful. Wonderful approach. It's getting better all the time. But again, they said, hey, they're going to moderate once they get into office. Is that true in any way, shape, or form at all? No. No, not at all. It's not true. And it's not true for a number of reasons here. But hold on just a second. There we go. Got to get the radio crew fading in here. Welcome, radio crew. Back from your commercial break. We're going to continue here. Listen to Pramila Jayapal of Washington. She says, yeah, sure, the socialists are winning and taking over the Democratic Party. I say embrace it. I say march with it. I say line up at those bread counters.
But there are House Democrats who seem worried about this as well. Tom Suozzi said, quote, we are capitalist, not socialist. Excuse me. What do you think these wins mean for the Tom Suozzi's, the more moderate establishment Democrats of your party?
Well, look, I think we're always told as progressives that we're a big tent party, that there has to be room for people who don't agree with progressives 100% of the time.
I will remind you, we've been playing the clips of the crowds of the Democratic Socialist youths, the Marxists, chanting "You're next" when shown any person currently in power that is not an open socialist like Pramila.
That's got to be true the other way as well. If we are a big tent party, we have to have both sides of the big tent included. And I think there are going to be issues where we don't agree 100% of the time. But I think what Leader Jeffries said is right. We are focused on making life better.
We're focused on making life better for Americans, are we, Pramila?
There are so many things, benefits that would accrue to America in normalizing our relations with Cuba.
Oh, yeah, it's not actually about you. It's just about advancing communism and socialism. That's it. It isn't about you.
We would have a trading partner just 90 miles south of our border to be able to send agricultural produce, medical supplies, to be able to take advantage of the incredible technological research capacity of the Cuban healthcare system.
Again, that no one has ever seen or reported back from. that all of the doctors and nurses that Cuba sends out completely amnesia away once they're in another country.
That has come up with a treatment for Alzheimer's.
Sources do trust me.
Imagine the 9 million American seniors across the country who would benefit from that treatment being available here in the United States.
But again, it's not actually about that, because the answer is quite simple. The Cuban regime must cede power to its people and allow them to elect a multi-party parliament, a multi-party House of Representatives. Because if they don't, then I don't care whether they're bringing us the glistening emerald city of Oz. If they are stripping the rights away of people and continuing communist regime nonsense, the answer is no. But for them, that's not a bug, that's a feature. And that brings us to the other nutcases. So again, I already played the clip of socialist Melat Kiros, again, now the Democratic nominee for the first district, for the first House district in Colorado. Of course, we've heard this before from Democrat Socialist congressional candidate Claire Valdez. At her large rally, her priorities are right out there in the open. Again, it's not about you. It's not about making things affordable for you. It's promising you government-run initiatives and then abolishing anything and everything that keeps you safe from open terrorist plots and violent gangs, from MS-13 or Tren de Aragua, etc.
So are we ready to free Palestine?
What could be more important to New Yorkers than freeing Palestine?
Are we ready to abolish ICE? Are we ready to win Medicare for all, housing for all, and unions for all?
Free houses and free healthcare and free unions for everything. So that means your paychecks are all going to be the same. Wait a minute, I've heard this one before. Now, there's another individual who also won Colorado's 8th, Manny Rutinel, again, another progressive, defeated Shannon Byrd, who was the projected winner. And he just so happens to be, this is bonkers. He just so happens to, back in the day, have rushed a football field when he was at Yale in an oil and gas protest. So we have one of the gluing your hands to art geniuses for climate change, a Greta Thunberg, now the Democratic ticket for Colorado's 8th.
Mr. Rutinel, 7 years ago, as a student at Yale, you got arrested for storming a football field during a game for a protest against oil and gas. You are now running to represent a district that is a big oil and gas producer.
Because, of course, this is just like James Tallarico, who said that it was unchristian to pump oil and gas. And now he's running to be senator of Texas. And here you have a guy, again, who is now the Democrat representative nominee, a big oil and gas producer in Colorado's 8th.
Question. Do you still believe, as your group said that day, hey, hey, ho, ho, fossil fuels have got to go?
You know, for that protest, I was a legal observer. I was making sure that folks were safe.
Yeah, I was a legal observer. I too, whenever I'm at the end of a game, I run out onto the field with the people who are doing the protesting. I'm like a journalist in Gaza. I put down the camera and I pick up an AK. Nothing says I'm a journalist like firing a Kalashnikov into the air. Can I get an amen? Incredible. I mean, how are the rest of the Democrats reacting to this? It's very telling. Those who are in power are so desperate not to be attacked, as some of these other incumbents have been attacked and dethroned. Again, the chair of the Democrat Congressional Hispanic Caucus was dethroned for Chevalier, whose dad is a landlord, but she says we should abolish owning private property, that nutcase. Well, it just so happens that while, the actual politicians are all work with anyone, please don't eat my face, leopards eating my face party, Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania.
Do you worry, though, Governor, about some of these candidates in these high-profile races in New York and now in Colorado will be elevated as representative of Democrats nationally with some of their extreme views?
That's on MS Now. If you're watching this, you see the tag at the bottom of the screen. If you're listening to this, that is the left-wing network MS Now, formerly MSNBC, the host saying, these people with wildly extreme views, you, the Jewish governor of Pennsylvania. Again, these people who went up to Scott Wiener, the state senator, the most pro-LGBTQ plus guy that there is. I mean, that guy, they went up to him, the dude who dressed in bondage gear for a pride parade, the gross leather crap. They went up to that guy and said, your bloodline is tainted because he's ethnically Jewish or something. They're asking Josh Shapiro, hey, these guys are really, really crazy. They're insane. Are you worried about working with them? Listen to this cucked, cowardly response.
I mean, look, here in Pennsylvania, folks know what pragmatism, results, and getting stuff done looks like, because they see me, they see other Democrats who are doing that in our Commonwealth. Look, I want to work with anyone.
Okay, I'm going to make this entirely and incredibly clear. If, God forbid, I ever get smacked in the head and decide to run for Congress, I will not work with anyone. I don't care if you're as kind and as gentle-hearted, whether you're the Pope, your Mother Teresa. I don't care whether you're the meanest old grouch that sits up in the gallery at a Muppet show. You should not have to work with everyone. You should have standards. There's this thing called an Overton window. That means as soon as someone steps outside and they start doing genuinely insane things, like, suggesting that 9/11 was a good thing, it was understood, whether we're talking about Ilhan Omar up in Minnesota, or whether we're talking about the new socialist candidate for Colorado's first, Melat Kiros, who said the U.S. deserved 9/11. I don't have to work with you anymore. No. There comes a time where that door does, in fact, need to swing closed. Now, again, this isn't just Josh Shapiro. You have people like Governor J.B. Pritzker of Illinois, who's like, boy, these youths and their energy, boy, this here's the way. So here's J.B. Pritzker.
Your party is in a bit of a moment right now following some elections here in New York.
Incredible rock star framing there by the CNN report. I mean, I'm sorry, Caitlin Collins going here for your party is having a moment right now. Yes. That would be correct, Steve. Nice framing.
3 candidates who identify as Democratic Socialist won their primary campaigns, several of them to oust the more moderate establishment members of Congress in their races. Do you think that's good? Are their victories good for your party?
I think what's good is that there are Democrats who are standing up and fighting, that there are Democrats who are standing up and talking about and doing something about addressing the high cost of things. Affordability is an issue that everybody is feeling all across the country. And any Democrat that is standing up and speaking out about that, coming up with solutions for that.
Again, they haven't come up with solutions for that. I would gladly play them for you here on the show so that I could argue over them. I'm looking for them. So far, I've heard Medicare for all. I've heard universal housing. I've heard taxing the rich. And we're going to tax the billionaires. We're going to tax them all. And which, again, doesn't work. And wouldn't even supply the deficit on Social Security. But I guess these are the solutions.
And importantly, doing it in a manner that is focused on fighting what Donald Trump is trying to do to raise prices on people.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I really enjoy this because, and as Western Lensman over on X provides, J.B. Pritzker's a billionaire. His net worth, dude's a billionaire. And you may remember Bernie Sanders and then Zoran Mamdani, the 2 leaders of the socialist radical movement. They say there shouldn't be any billionaires. So he gets presented with that. Here's his response. This is just so sad. It's funny.
My line is there should not be billionaires.
I don't think that we should have billionaires.
You were a
Get ready for the mental gymnastics. Do some stretching.
billionaire whose net worth Forbes puts at $4.3 billion. What do you make of Democrats in your party as we lead up to 2026 and the midterm elections in 2028 who rail against the billionaire class in your party?
You know, I completely understand when people feel like looking at Elon Musk and what he's done to this country and, with Doge and all the things that he blurts out on his own platform on X, when people look at what the other kind of oligarch big tech types have done, right? Those are the examples that people have now.
I'm sorry, if you having a net worth of $4.3 billion doesn't make you one of the alleged oligarchs, what does it make you? What is like everyone else investing in super hypersonic weapons and you made your fortune in the Build-A-Bear stuffed animal field? Because like animals, you also know how to stuff yourself at dinner time? Like, good sweet Lord, what an answer. Radio crew, I'm going to send all 4.3 billion of you over to the commercial break. We're going to continue on the live stream because, like usual, J.B. Pritzker's got a mouthful.
Of billionaires, look at Donald Trump and the way he has treated working class and middle class people. The fact is that I understand why people feel as they do, but I think it's much more about the values that you carry and then carry out. And as somebody who...
Well, they won't hurt me. I have values. Remember when the riots were starting in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and in Minneapolis, Minnesota? Remember those? Remember how there were people that desperately tried to paint on their windows, Black Lives Matter? We share the same values. You won't hurt me, right? Guess what? Bricks also flew through those windows. I mean, again, you think that the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, who was a hyper-racialist and made everything about race, didn't share some of the same wholesome values that the Democratic Socialists did? Oh, I'm sure that if I march alongside the Bolshevists, they won't hurt us Menshevists. I'm sure we'll be just fine. Enjoy digging your own grave. Now, there are some that are sounding the alarm. I told you that John Hickenlooper's former chief of staff would come into play here. Former chief of staff Doug Friednash for Senator John Hickenlooper. He's just in open panic here, folks.
You're, of course, very familiar with Colorado politics. We're happy to have you here to talk about this. What do you make of these results so far?
Well, I think, first of all, thank you for having me. I think the Democratic Party is becoming unrecognizable.
Uh-oh.
While Democrats may be falling in love with socialism, the rest of the country is not. And it feels to me like Democrats, with a lack of leadership in D.C. and a lack of messaging, is running into a collision course and may have a midterm death wish.
They do, in fact, have a midterm death wish. And on the Senate side, in a couple of different ways. Because is Adam Schiff calling this stuff out from his Senate side in California, or Kristen Gillibrand in New York? No and no. They're embracing it. Please don't hurt me. The rest of the country's watching. Your audience is not a primary audience. This is a very outdated idea. Republicans rightfully threw this away after 2018 and 20. Nope, not for them.
She has sympathetic references to communism, talks about a Marxist ideology, talks about seizing the means of production, abolish police, prisons, and borders, wiping her hands on a U.S. flag. She now,
as one does, Chevalier,
says, quote,
I almost forgot. Apparently Chevalier is dating Zoran Mamdani's lawyer because, Of course. Anyway.
I have grown considerably in the years since these tweets, and I'm focused on our community and our community's future, which is not exactly disowning the comments. What do you make of these comments and the fact that this is a growing brand of the Democratic Party?
Well, I wouldn't say that those comments are reflective of a growing brand in the party.
Oh, no. Not a growing brand in the party. Sure, all of these DSA candidates, those are their planks. The chair of that caucus refuses to say anything different. Oh, I wouldn't say it's a growing brand. It's just a growing brand.
I understand that she's advocated closing all prisons, defunding police departments, opening borders. None of those views are within the mainstream of the Democratic Party.
Sure. And then, by the way, he does say that he welcomes the energy and the youth and excitement. Same with Kristen Gillibrand.
Fidel Vargas, President and CEO, HSF. What is your explanation for what happened in New York?
Welcome back, radio crew. You're just in time. Kristen Gillibrand, again, who was supposed to be not the most crazy, insane of Democrat senators. This is going to matter in a second because it is really looking a lot better for Republicans, whose strategy right now is just do nothing and win. It's pretty wild. It's bizarre. Here's Kristen on socialism and the active anti-Semitic, anti-Christian, openly racist, openly violent, openly communist wing of the mainstream Democratic Party.
The primaries, and especially those in New York City. Mm-hmm. How are you taking that to heart as a senator from New York, as the head of the senatorial campaign, and as a member of the Democratic Party?
Yes. So New York had a very strong change election. There was a huge interest in new candidates, younger candidates in some instances, the next generation of candidates. And so there was several instances where incumbents lost to challengers because of that trend. And that trend is a very good trend.
Oh, it's very, very good. It's a great thing. By the way, what this is, so after the French Revolution got started with all of the beheading, so Robespierre famously said, hey, let's get all these people out, we'll cut their heads off. And then they cut off all of the heads of a lot of the French royalty. And then what you ended up seeing was a lot of the nobility of France also starting to get their heads lopped off. And there was a moment where Robespierre noticed that there was someone of his noble class also getting his head lopped off. And he commented in French, like, "Messieurs, this is not looking exactly good, but I think that their bloodlust will be satiated." And eventually, they cut his own head off. History repeating itself is just a truly, truly wonderful thing. Now, here in 9 minutes, I recognize it's 7:51. I will get to the rest of the Senate stuff here in just a moment. I do want to point out that the Senate odds have completely flipped. Because the Senate, again, when you get an entire state in, a lot of these are middle of the country races. What you're not seeing is a lot of movement on Democrat candidates who are currently trying as hard as they can to kind of satiate the other side. So if we move past this, incredible dork, on the poly market side, and this is, again, people that are betting based on a lot of insanity that's going on, a lot of other political polls that are coming out, which we'll reference in a second. Republicans are projected now to keep the Senate like 57% to 42%. That's not small. And again, it's not just yours truly who's saying that when looking at the polling data, because I do want to dive in. You've got in New Hampshire now, John Sununu up against Chris Pappas, 44% to 47% in climbing. So in New Hampshire, John Sununu is gaining on Chris Pappas, who also refuses to condemn the socialism stream. And then there's the polling for Susan Collins that's starting to go better against Graham Plattner. The tide is shifting.
Fox survey out indicates the Senate race in Maine is shaping up to be a very close contest. Our new poll finds Republican incumbent Senator Susan Collins has a small 3 percentage point lead advantage over Democrat challenger Graham Plattner among Maine registered voters.
Now, this is also a trend as we kind of look abroad. Susan Collins, she's consistently polled weaker than she performs. Very few people are willing to get out there and go, yeah, Susan, she's our gal. Very few do that. And so when the pollsters call, they're not like, I'll tell you who I love, Susan Collins, Republican extraordinaire. People don't do that. But they will go out and vote for her. So if on all of the other polls, she's also gaining ground, it's a very, very bad sign for Maine Führer. Now, again, Harry Enton makes this point, I would say, even a little bit better than I do on his polling data that he's seeing.
Okay, so what's the simple math here? Democrats need a net gain of four Senate seats to regain control of the upper chamber in Congress. And right now, the math, simply put, isn't there for them. That is the picture. And I want you, it's just, it's a math problem. It is a math problem. 2026 Senate poll margins. Okay, Democrats need a net gain of 4. Okay, you get 1 in North Carolina. But then you got a bunch of red on the screen. Now, these are close races, but you got a tie in Texas. Then it's +2 in Iowa for the Republicans.
I should point out, by the way, that on the Texas polling, likely voters, so those who are not just registered, but are likely voters, those who are really getting into it, like the actual, like the good stuff, it just so happens that you have not Tallarico pulling away in Texas, but Ken Paxton. So if we're going to start weighing the values of polls here, not looking too good for Tallarico. Then there's Iowa, then there's Alaska, then there's Ohio.
+2 in Alaska, and then +3, if we can make the circle there, in Ohio. So that gets you 1 seat, but of course you need 4 seats. And on this board, red, close races, and a tie. You're at 1, you're not yet to 4.
So there's a couple of things that don't look too good there. On the House side, it's also not looking good for Ro Khanna. We'll have to put him aside for a second because I did want, before we got to the top of the hour, to talk about 2 things. So a lot of the Democrat politicians are trying to be very sportsy to connect with the youths right now. So, for example, Ro Khanna was out there at a baseball game. He's going, boy, I am sure a fan of this team. And he's in like the fancy box seats. He just looks like he's been plucked out of a Jackson Pollock painting and slapped and splatted right into the box there. He's completely out of place. And then, more like a Van Gogh painting and Scream, he just looks horrible. There's your 2 painting references for the day. And so in this particular instance, Ro Khanna's like, oh yes, I sure am liking of the baseball. A couple of more runs, please. Other Democrats are in a bit of a bind because the United States isn't doing that bad in the World Cup. We've won a lot of matches so far. We've lost to Turkey. Although we are playing Bosnia tonight, and it's set to be a doozy. And the reason it's set to be a doozy, I mean, you've got like crowds of the fans from Bosnia, again, Eastern Europe's finest, who are roaming the streets in California neighborhoods and are just like chanting and exciting. Now, normally you see these kind of protests or rallies in Minnesota or New York or Ohio, and it's for Somalian Independence Day. We'll get to some of that later. So anyway, here's Bosnians chanting and cheering in getting ready for the game. Now, some of the Californian tough guys who are going to get out there and throw out the sideways gat and stop them from rustling through their neighborhoods, it turns out going up to Bosnians, many of whose families have likely committed serious UN-aggrieved war crimes, probably not good to go up there and be like, hey, yo, man, get out of this neighborhood. That ain't, nope. I don't recommend it. Now, do I think that the United States is going to beat Bosnia tonight? I sure hope so. I'm sad that we didn't get to see the U.S. versus England match on July 4th. But good luck to the U.S. team against Bosnia. What do you need to know? Eastern Europeans are violent. The Bosnian social ministry is very active on social media, so there will be a lot of really great clips. And also, the World Cup has been a universal win for the United States because it has shown the rest of the world that, first of all, our high school stadiums can hold their major soccer matches, as well as just the glory of this country in general. Radio crew will catch you guys tomorrow. We've got way more to cover on the live stream, including a breaking information on a lawsuit from CIA Director John Brennan. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast. Sorry, was really cutting it close there on the FCC clock. Okay, before we get to Ro Khanna's glorious downfall, Mr. Oligarch over here, let's get you some information on a developing story this afternoon. Former CIA Director John Brennan, that would be Obama's CIA director, has now preemptively sued the Trump administration. This is a weird one. So as you may recall, John Brennan, after the Trump campaign in 2016, won the election and beat out Hillary Clinton, there was this time of very weird transition panic where John Brennan and several other members of the intelligence sphere falsified documents from the intelligence community, which had, by the way, before being altered, had indicated that Russia was covering for Hillary Clinton, in which Russia had evidence galore, videos, documents, etc., that said, like, Hillary Clinton takes a bunch of Quaaludes for her bipolar disorder and essentially is meaner to her staffers than Katie Porter with a vat of mashed potatoes. Just like really abusive. Basically, Hillary Clinton was like the Eric Swalwell of the Democratic National Committee. Just awful. An awful person. And Russia sat on that information. And instead of releasing that, which would have obviously benefited the Donald Trump campaign experience, instead they sat on it. And so what happened was Brennan and the rest of the intelligence community leadership went to President Obama, and what may have been at his direct order, altered the intelligence reports, suggesting that it was Donald Trump who had been coordinating and collaborating with the Russians on this, that, and the other, that would eventually lead to a huge act of, a huge violation of the Espionage Act of 1927 during Trump's first term. And we saw some weird things. Brennan kind of did a sort of agreement to work with the DOJ, and maybe that was to try and sell out someone like maybe the other members of the intelligence community on maybe classified document use, maybe James Comey. Well, today, John Brennan filed a lawsuit, this time in a very, very bizarre turn of events, against the Trump administration for preemptively trying to ensure that documents aren't shredded or deleted. So, John Brennan's attorney is alleging, quote, given the strong indicia, given the indicators of vindictiveness of Donald Trump, Director Brennan expects that he will forcefully challenge any eventual indictment. Any eventual. You're not jumping the gun there just a bit there, NPR? Anyway, any eventual indictment as the product of an unconstitutionally vindictive and selective prosecution. In assessing that challenge, the court presiding over Director Brennan's criminal case would look into the government's internal records and communications around its investigation and charging decisions to discern the true motivations behind the government's actions. So what are they actually trying to do here? They're trying to intervene while Tulsi Gabbard has stepped out as the Director of National Intelligence to see if there is any indication that Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche reached out to the new acting director of national intelligence to say, hey, are you still looking into Brennan? Do you still have all of the files where the intelligence community in 2016 and early 2017 altered Russia's level of involvement with the 2016 presidential campaign season? They're looking for that because they're hoping if they can say, you got to get John Brennan, Susie, get out your phone, do a little texty text and say, John Brennan's got to go. That's what they're looking for, like trying to do a pre-discovery lawsuit. That's a new one for me.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
So this is from Brennan's lawyer, quote, given the government's questionable recent history with respect to its record preservation and other legal obligations, however, Director Brennan has a well-founded concern that those records and communications will not be preserved until such time as the court can review them for evidence of unconstitutional vindictiveness. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Those documents are at this point preserved in the Library of Congress. And I don't know if you know this, but it's not like you can be Count Dooku, where you can just go into the Jedi archives and delete the evidence of Kamino's existence. And the clone army, that's not how that works. Once those documents and records are illustrated specifically and in great detail in the Library of Congress and are then confirmed by getting your local registrar and notary to get in front and say these documents are legitimate, those aren't changing, those aren't leaving. It's a very weird lawsuit, and I think that it's meant to try to get some kind of a judge to stall things. Now, what actually has the John Brennan crew upset? I believe this is all speculation at this point based on timeline and the connections of John Brennan. John Brennan had in recent months gotten fairly close to John Bolton, the ex-Trump national security advisor. John Bolton just pled guilty to mishandling classified documents. So I think that John Brennan right now is getting really, really, really nervous. One of the individuals in this Obama scheme, again, there's all sorts of classified document releases that are currently underway, and a lot of things that you were told were never happening, like the Hunter Biden laptop case thing, or the leaks from the Supreme Court, or the COVID-19 coordination between the Biden Health and Human Services Department and the CDC, and teachers union head Randy Weingarten. Those things that you were told never happened at all, it turns out that now they're happening. And a great example of this would be the long-standing conservative premise, and independence premise, by the way, as well, that certain blue states were manipulating their data and their work requirement data on welfare so that either they could get more welfare funding from the federal government or so that the federal government wouldn't pimp slap them with penalties for not meeting work requirements. Well, new documents from the Department of Health and Human Services show things are looking just a little bit sketchy for them now that the Trump administration is actually directing departments to release a lot of this data, not on some 2002 website, but in great detail. So we're going to pivot out really quickly to reset our clock now that we're in the second broadcast hour. Don't go anywhere. A ton of great stuff tonight. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on The Daily Signal.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIPC.
So from the Department of Health and Human Services and the Administration for Children and Families, there are a series of briefs that are now being released. And what's so exciting about a series of briefs, you say, well, wouldn't you know, amid all of the exposure on fraud around the country, individuals trying to take advantage of Medicare, of Medicaid, trying to take advantage of various benefits programs, it also just so happens that there might be a couple of states that are just trying to get past the very basic welfare work requirements because, you know, of course. To talk about that a little bit more and again, heading up some of these briefs on what are likely to be a series of findings that may lead to investigations, great to be joined by none other than David Sweigel. He's the director of the Office of Family Assistance over at the ACF. David, thanks for giving us a couple of minutes.
Great to be here.
Well, let's dive right in. I know the states thought they were going to sneak this past you if it just weren't for those meddling kids at the ACF. So walk us through it. What's going on?
Yeah, so we're putting out this series of issue briefs where we've realized, kind of stepping back for a moment, we have access to data at this point for these 4 years while we're in office. Under the leadership of President Trump, we want to say we have this data that we have access to internally. We want to publicize it and get it out there in front of the American people. And not only just in spreadsheets and unreadable formats, but we want to actually make it digestible and kind of shape the narrative of what's actually going on behind this data. So we're putting out issue briefs. We just had one that came out this week focused on the work participation rate. Now, the work participation rate is TANF's core accountability measure. So this is going back to welfare reform of 1996. The key provision here was saying we want to move individuals from welfare to work. And so how states are held accountable on this is through the work participation rate. And so we put out an issue brief kind of exposing a lot of the gimmicks and loopholes states are exploiting so that they don't have to meet these work requirements that they're held to by federal standards.
So you have these various states that are essentially trying to, what appears to be, allegedly, trying to fudge the numbers so that they can receive a larger amount of federal dollars and not maybe be held to the account that the basic congressionally passed laws and reforms had all the way back in, again, the mid-90s.
Correct. So they would never receive more funding. It's a capped federal block grant. But what they're trying to avoid is penalties. We have penalties at the federal level, but that's also
penalties.
One of the weaknesses.
Okay.
So if they fail to meet this work rate, they would be hit with a penalty at the federal level. The penalties themselves, though, are very weak, and it can be often drawn out over years, if not decades. So even if they were to fail one of these metrics, it's hard for us to enforce it at the federal level because it can be such a long, drawn-out process. But what a lot of these states are doing is they'll have in statute, there's a 50% requirement where 50% of their caseload has to be engaged in work activities. Through some measures, when they reduce their caseload, that 50% can get lowered dramatically. So a lot of states have a 0% target to begin with. But then even beyond that, these states use gimmicks and loopholes to try to juice their work participation rate numbers. So one of those is through what we call token payments, where in order to make it look like more of their caseload is actually working, they find individuals who are working and who are meeting work requirements, and they will give those individuals so-called token payments. It could be $1, maybe $10, and they say, now you're part of the TANF caseload and you're working, so then now that's going to increase their ratio and make their numbers look better. They're finding the people who are already working and saying, now we're going to add you to the TANF caseloads by giving you just a little bit of money, and now you're going to help us when we go to the feds and our numbers are going to look better.
So let me break this down from kind of a data perspective, like a former education guy, and into what the analogy would be, because that's kind of one of our specialties. Imagine that the city was doing a study on how safe certain supermarkets were. And I, just passing through the city, I don't even live in that city, I stop on my way through town to grab one sports drink once from this one supermarket that they're looking at. Well, the city is going to say, well, now Tony is part of our regular users of this particular supermarket. That is so shady that they would just take a random guy, say, here's $1. Now you're receiving some of the same requirements here. Now you're part of this caseload to make us look really better. I mean, that's Chicago style politics, man. That's gross.
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot in blue states. And what we're trying to say is we're paying attention. And not only are we paying attention, but we want to get this data out there so that Congress, so that policymakers, so that the American people can actually see what's going on. So that's not hidden in some Excel spreadsheet somewhere, but it's actually digestible for them to be able to say what's going on here and raise the alarm bells.
Of course, that's incredibly important. One little extra bit here. I know there's a brand new brief that's just now out talking about illegal immigrants and benefit recipients actually receiving benefits. Another brief kind of looking through all of this data. What can you tell us so far? Again, I know that this is right up at its finishing stages and is really new. What can you break down for us here on the Tony Kinnett Cast?
Yes. So we just this week released our work participation rate issue brief, but a couple weeks ago we issued a separate issue brief on the topic of child-only cases for the children of immigration status and eligible parents. So they're not necessarily all illegal aliens. A large portion of them likely are illegal aliens, but they themselves are not eligible for TANF benefits. And so what happens in these
work
cases,
visa, student visa individuals then?
Correct.
That kind of a thing.
So the parents themselves are not eligible, and this gets to the Supreme Court decisions yesterday on birthright citizenship, but the children themselves are citizens. So what states will do is they'll turn this into a child-only case. So the child is technically the recipient, but the funds go to the family as a whole, and there's no requirement that the funds be spent on the child themselves. The family can do what they would want with it. So at the end of the day, what we're really trying to point out is there's kind of this dichotomy and unfairness because American families are being held to a different standard. So one of TANF's major provisions and kind of the benefits that came from the 1996 welfare reform was the fact that welfare needed to be tied to work and it needed to be time limited. So for a normal American family, TANF binds them to a 60-month federal cap, so they can't receive benefits more than 60 months or 5 years. And there's also work requirements tied in, and that gets to this issue brief that we issued this week. So that's core to TANF's philosophy and core to its accountability measures. But for these child-only cases of immigration status ineligible parents, they're not bound by either of those. So there's not the work requirement, and there's also not the 60-month time limit. So if they have a child, they can be receiving benefits for all 18 years of that child's life, whereas an American family would only be able to receive benefits for 5 years.
Right, and that's one of the things that to kind of put this in common speech here for the viewers and the listeners. So imagine you have two American citizens who don't meet a series of work requirements, who aren't meeting some of this. They could only receive benefits for their child. Again, they're an American citizen, their spouse is an American citizen, or it's a single parent situation. They can only receive benefits for their American citizen child for 5 years. And again, kind of depends based on how some of the work requirements are met or not met. But then if you have someone who is here either as an illegal immigrant or on a work visa or a student visa, and they have a child, you'll have states which say, oh, this child is all out on their lonesome, like Oliver and Company, just like all these, don't take any, maybe if the parents are working or they're not meeting requirements, 18 years of benefits for this child because they just popped out of the holes in the ground like a dwarf. I mean, they're an American citizen. Don't ask any other questions. And then that family, either on a visa or illegally, they get benefits of up to like 18 years of those benefits. Dude, that's insane. That's insane.
It's truly unfair. And what we're just trying to point out is this basic unfairness. And in reality, it's a great provision to have for American families that we say, no, part of this program is going to be moving you to work and moving you off of welfare.
Because that should be the goal, is getting you to a point where you no longer need it, because that means that it's worked and you're saved or you're cured, or the social benefits have saved you from falling through the cracks. That's the idea.
Exactly. We want to get people set up with a healthy, stable marriage, with a healthy family life, and then with a good paying job. And at the end of the day, if those two core pillars are set up, then they're not going to need government support. They're not going to need to be reliant on welfare going forward.
I'm sorry. It's so funny today to actually hear someone say the goal is for the making it easy to have a stable marriage, a good, strong household, a work environment that benefits them. And again, if there are, and as a traditional conservative, I'm not out here, saying all of the benefits all of the time, but I'm saying, look, if there are going to be withdrawals from my paycheck, from your paycheck to pay for benefits, I want those benefits to go where they are promised to go. And again, even if these are cases where these are, whether they're loopholes or they're legal standards that are just vague enough so that you can get these things through, an office who is actually going through and saying, well, tell you what we're going to do. We're going to release a series of briefs from the Office of Family Assistance, and we're going to put this in plain language for people of the United States, for their representatives and senators in Congress to actually be able to use and then change future policy. Dude, that finally, something that's actually being used properly regarding data in the federal government. David Swigel, thanks for giving us a couple of minutes and breaking some of this down for us. Can't believe that we're actually aiming towards some decent things here. It's a 1 in a million shot. Thanks, dude.
Thank you very much.
I couldn't believe it. After 250 years, actually getting the feds to actually release reports on the day. I'm shocked. Again, I'm pretty thrilled. You can tell I'm in a good mood because it is the 250th year of the United States. I'm loving it, because while all of the Bosnians have to come over here and experience what true freedom looks like, again, while we have the rest of Europe, the rest of the world that is looking on in envy, you have China, again, who is panicking. The Belt and Road Initiative, it ain't panning out. The independence of the United States will, in fact, weather the socialists. It'll weather the Marxists. We had the syndicalists in the 1920s. They were dealt with. Now it's the 2020s, and we have the Marxists and the socialists over here. This too, indeed, shall pass. And, to be completely clear, 250 years later, we're still here drinking whatever the government decided to, put in the water. I mean, especially if you live in the city, you live in town limits. Fluoride for your teeth, chlorine to help keep things clean. Look, that's not a decision that I want for somebody to be making for my family, which is why I use, it's true, Cove Pure to purify my water. I am so picky when it comes to sponsors. Love the ADF, Cove Pure. They're the stuff, man. Over 209 million Americans. They're on fluoridated water right now. The science shows a recent study confirming that fluoride exposure is linked to some pretty difficult mental calculation issues with kids, mainly because there's some questions as to kind of the neurological development regarding how fluoride actually interacts with that. Sorry, former science teacher stuff, that'll jump in. That's not a fringe study. That's from JAMA Pediatrics, one of the most respected medical journals in the world. Chlorine, not even the worst part. When it reacts with natural particles in the water from the plants and soil, it creates chemical byproducts called THMs, which the federal government itself calls probable human carcinogens. That's linked to the disruption of your gut, and then of course it's a carcinogen, so cancer. Sure, there are states that are moving on this, Utah and Florida banning fluoride, for instance. That process takes years, though. Your kids, your family, they're drinking this water today. You need something that works now. That's what Cove Pure is. They're certified to remove up to 99.9% of contaminants, fluoride, THMs, pharmaceuticals, PFAs, anything that is not water gets filtered out. And not only that, I always have it here on the desk. Victor Davis Hanson recommended it to me, recommended I get one of these things. I did. It's already halfway empty because I'm talking up a storm here. I am a well water purist from the Midwest. It's divine. I hate city water. Just got back from New York City. The water sucks. Screw their bagels. It's so good for the water. It's awful. New York City water, it sucks. Indiana, the well water through a Cove Pure, it's divine. It's easy to set up. Threw it in the studio, filled it with water, installed the filters. Presto, done. Easier than slapping a crappy coffee cup in a Keurig. It's good stuff. Hot, cold water, whatever I need. So don't wait for the government to catch up. Right now, in honor of America's 250th anniversary, Cove Pure is giving my audience $250 off. If you use my link, covepure.com/Tony K. Cove Pure, COVEPURE.com/TONYK. $250 off. We love Cove Pure. Thank you very much for the sponsorship on that side. And that said, let's move to the, what happens if you drink a little too much chlorine? What happens if you're drinking a little too much lead in the water? Well, you get Ro Khanna. So Ro Khanna, best buddy of Thomas Massie, he's really trying so hard, bless his heart, to be the next superist, the supery duperist House Speaker for the Democrats. And so he's trying to be everything to everyone, and it's not working. So you may remember Ro Khanna got out there and he was getting mad at Elon Musk and the billionaires and, oh, we need a wealth tax and all of this nonsense. Do we actually have that clip of Ro Khanna being an absolute nutcase? I think that we do. Mr. Oligarchy himself. Here you go.
Mr. Speaker, the progressive movement is winning across the country, from the heart of New York to Michigan to Maine. The people are saying no to foreign wars, and they're saying no to genocide in Gaza. They're saying no to the unfair and lopsided economy that has allowed a few people to hoard extreme wealth and power.
Wow, hoarding extreme wealth and power. Interesting. We'll get to that in a second.
And they're saying yes to Medicare for all, to unions for all.
Ah, yes, unions for all. So that you, too, can join a labor union or a teachers union that does absolutely bleep all for you, and then instead gives millions and billions of dollars in campaign donations to Bernie Sanders and Ro Khanna. It's not for you. I'll never forget, on my first year that I was teaching at Knightstown Intermediate School, that's where they shot the movie Hoosiers. I'm going to the school mailboxes, like the big, huge rectangular mailboxes where there's like a ton of little slots for mail. And I noticed that there were these little tiny cellophane wrapped bags of fudge. I mean, like 2 or 3 pieces of 1 inch by 1 inch fudge, like just little tiny little goldfish carnival bags. And I went to a lady who was the union rep for that school. And I said, what's with the bags of fudge in some of the bins? Obviously not in mine. My grandmother, Mary, makes far better fudge than any of these fools could ever hope to make. God bless you, Nana. And anywho, the union rep said, well, this is how we're appreciating our teachers. Not by negotiating better salaries, not by negotiating better benefits, not by bringing teachers back, through the whole COVID pandemic. No. That money is reserved to go to Democrat politicians in their general elections. You get a cheap basket, a little 2 or 3 pieces of fudge. There you go. You can feel the middle finger that stirred that fudge from the union. So anyway, they're turning unions for all.
To child care for all, to making sure that we have a housing guarantee for kids by the time they're 35 if they work hard. Now,
universal housing by the time you're 35.
Some of the oligarchs don't like it. Elon Musk has been threatening to sue me or jail me. But I'll tell you what, they should judge us by those who are attacking us.
How about we judge you by your financial records? According to the Washington Free Beacon and their excellent recording and reporting team, in 2024, Ro Khanna's financial disclosures clocked in at 333 pages of non-text searchable tables, which means he filed them, and literally on the paper they took the table. I'm sorry, I don't have a screenshot of this for you. They took the table and they skewed it and they blurred it, like when your teacher would copy the same worksheet too many times, and by the time that it gets to you, there's more toner blurred across it than like a map for Indiana Jones. You know what I'm talking about? So like they tried to do that for his financial disclosure form so that you couldn't search them online, so that AI and image recognition wouldn't dig through it. So the folks over at the Washington Free Beacon said, that's pretty freaking suspicious. And they grabbed them and found 3,000 individual assets owned by Ro Khanna, his wife, and his children, with each asset having ticked one of the 13 available boxes corresponding to an asset valuation range, meaning like these are expensive enough that you have to report them to the federal government. Put together, those assets are worth anywhere from $103 million to more than $340 million. It's possible that the net worth of Khanna's family, his nuclear family, could far exceed $340 million. So this dude, that Mr. Tax the rich, Mr. Oligarchy, just like J.B. Pritzker, this dude's worth $1/3 billion because, of course.
Oh, there's a big surprise.
Incredible. He reported a total of 10 assets held by his wife and 2 children. You know how your 2 young children hold very expensive assets? I'll have you know that my toddler just so happens to have both of my Porsche 911s. Why? Well, because she thinks they're pretty colors and I don't want to actually pay taxes on. That's the logic there. Beautiful, incredible. States aren't the only one doing welfare fraud and fudging the numbers reporting, huh? So, anywho, the 10 assets held by his wife and 2 children, including the stakes they hold in 3 golf clubs. Remember when Hillary Clinton accused Donald Trump in the 2015-2016 campaign of using tax loopholes? People like Ro Khanna have been attacking Trump for using rich people tax loopholes forever. Here you have Ro Khanna, whose children and wife are owning stakes in golf courses. This holiday season, get your child the gift of equity in your local golf club. Sheldon Whitehouse's children own equity in whites-only golf clubs. Sorry, another reference for another time. Worth more than $1 million with no disclosed ceiling. For his 2 young children, Khanna reported in 2024 they own between $26 million and more than $73 million in irrevocable trusts. Remember, Ro Khanna wants to tax the inheritance stuff, but his kids have already got the trust, so he's already got his kids through it, so again, screw you from Representative Ro Khanna of California, the sidekick for Bernie Sanders when he's not looking at AOC's behind. Incredible. Well done, everyone. Just well done. His wife drives a $190,000 luxury Range Rover. His house has a 4-story indoor elevator. I mean, Mr. Oligarchy, ladies and gentlemen. I love it. I love it so much. I do. It's hilarious. It's a wonderful time. It's truly a wonderful time. Now, over to the Republican Senate side, because what are Republicans doing right now? Well, they're kind of stalling. Again, the Save America Act does appear to have a path forward. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But speaking of the Senate, when Mitch McConnell was rushed to the hospital, so again, you guys had heard of news last month in which Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, the Republican senator who has an age of 526, he was sent to the hospital. However, now reports are confirming that the guy was found unconscious when he was rushed to the hospital. So Republicans, when running for future elections, maybe You don't have to elect the young socialist who's setting fire to things and trying to kill all of the Jews and Christians and hoisting the Somalian flag over Ohio cities and Minnesota cities and New York cities. You don't have to do that. But you can hire people that are under the age of Methuselah. I mean, by the way, by the time that some guys in the Bible reached this age, God just took them. Because, that even they had lived too long and were close enough to God not to die. So anyway, really great stuff over there. And by the way, McConnell did not have to run for re-election last time, but now we're stuck with him. And then, of course, Democrat Governor Andy Beshear would, of course, put in place a Democrat until a special election in the case of McConnell having to retire. So stellar stuff over there. McConnell is one of the guys who was, of course, refusing to overturn the filibuster, who he was very likely around for when they put it into place. So to chat about that, I want to get a little bit of an update for you, because instead of just hearing me talk about the Save America Act, I've got something for you that's a little bit better. To talk a little bit more about that, the Save America Act, not Toy Story, we're going to go to Chip Wyatt from Heritage Action. A lot of stuff we could dive into, but given the Supreme Court rulings, plural, over the last week, a lot of people are wondering, is the Save America Act going to be given kind of more of a chance now? What are we looking at here? What do you think?
Well, it should be. I don't think that the court's rulings on any subject should have that much of an impact as to whether or not this legislation, which is broadly popular, gets moved. It should be just as relevant as it was before any of these cases, even more so afterwards. And, there are still several viable paths forward in the Senate that just have yet to be explored.
So obviously, in a perfect world, we could look at the Supreme Court not really having an impact, but there does appear to be an opportunity for maybe a pressure point on some of these paths becoming more viable. And I know that kind of on the action side of things, that you guys are invested in making sure that some of these different paths are kind of weighed one against the other, and that we do start moving in a direction where we get some progress on this. What are some of those paths that are actually viable, not just kind of wish casting?
Sure. So the primary path to get the Save America Act through the Senate would be a talking filibuster, is what you'll commonly hear it referred to as. This is sort of your basic Mr. Smith goes to Washington style, get up there, force the opposition to talk, to actually debate the bill, as opposed to just allowing the silent opposition that sort of runs the Senate right now. So to paint you a little bit of a picture, the way that the Senate currently works, the 60 vote threshold of the modern day filibuster is just assumed. It's just assumed that on every bill, you need 60 votes, but nobody actually has to go down there and debate it. There's no cost to the opposition. It's just assumed that the opposition is there, and they automatically get to erect this barrier to the legislation passing. What you could do is, in alignment with the Senate rules, you could force actual debate on the bill. This would force members to stay on the floor. The members that were opposed to the bill would have to express why they are opposed to it. And the goal would simply be to tire those members out. There's only so much time in a day, and in a month, and in a year, and eventually you would get to a point where, in a perfect world, you could pass the bill at a simple majority at 51 once you had tired out the entire Democratic conference. But also, you could, instead of doing that, you could also come to some sort of agreement or some sort of deal on a compromise in order to get that debate to stop. But you have to introduce that element of debate if you want anything to move forward.
Gotcha. So, I mean, obviously, we've talked on the show before about Cory Booker trying yet another kind of constipated speech, 24, 48 hours of, putting on his angry eyes and going to yell before the dumpster fire that often is the Senate floor. But this idea of a compromise immediately kind of puts a little bit of a red flag up for a lot of Americans, because usually the word compromise, the sausage being made in the back room, as it were, means one of two things. Either one, it means we get something really, really awful as a counterweight for the Save America Act and a lot of the principles in it that people like, or that the Save America Act would be compromised itself and become so watered down that, I mean, it's basically just saying, hey, we rule that the state of California should really consider someday maybe counting ballots a little sooner. What kind of compromise is actually worth compromising on, and how do we avoid either of those extremes?
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. And I think it's right for people to be skeptical whenever you hear the word compromise, because my mind automatically goes to the same place that yours did, right? It's sort of, you create this legislative, strongly worded letter that doesn't really do anything. And that's not what would happen here. And the reason why is because, and why compromise is a dirty word in the modern Congress, but particularly in the Senate, is actually because of the assumption that the 60 vote threshold is the only way to get things passed. So if you start there, whatever compromise you can come up with to get 60 votes is automatically going to have to be terrible, because there's no forcing mechanism to try to pull the opposition towards some better product, because they have no vested interest in making that product better, because there's no cost for them. But if you were to do a sustained talking filibuster on the Save America Act, that automatically introduces an element that's different from any other negotiation. And that element is, and what would ultimately be driving some kind of compromise, is that if you don't come to the table and negotiate, we're just going to keep going. And then if we manage to tire you out, we're going to pass the bill as it is right now. And so if you would like a compromise, if you would like this process to end, then you have to be the one to come to the table. You have to be the one who says, all right, let's negotiate. Let's maybe come up with something that we're willing to give 60 votes for on voter ID, or another election integrity measure that would be worth fighting for. But the key dictator of whether or not a compromise is going to be good are the terms. And the terms of the modern Senate are broken, and that's why the swamp always wins. That's why the compromises are never compromises that are for the good of the American people. It's always for the good of the Senate. But if you start on a much more aggressive posture, if the battle plan and the battlefield is actually set and it's stacked in favor of the good policy, even if you do eventually get to a compromise, that compromise is probably still a good product at the end of the day, in a way that it would not be otherwise.
Last question here for you. As a former science teacher, I like teaching about simple machines. So let's talk wedges. So if we're going to bring a wedge between, in a rather opportune time, the Democratic Socialists of America wing, the hyper-progressive, openly communist wing that's rising in the party, and the more corporate, technocratic members of the Democratic Party, there's quite an opportunity with all of the insane things that are being said, and whether it's a possible candidate Abdul El Sayed from Michigan or Graham Plattner in Maine, again, these individuals who are wildly radical, there might be a desire, even if it's very small, minuscule. Obviously, John Fetterman from Pennsylvania's name is brought up a lot, to separate him from the wackadoodles. So is there an opportunity here for some of the Democrat senators, maybe a Cortez Masto of Nevada, who every once in a blue moon is accidentally moderate? Is there an opportunity to split the Democrats from themselves on a compromise issue with the Save America Act? We've seen this on government shutdown stuff before, but this is something that, while similar, is different entirely.
I think that opportunity is always there on most issues to expose those fractures. And that's one of the things that the Senate and the Senate majority has to actually try to do. And you have to do that by making the effort. You won't ever know if that wedge can actually be created unless you try to drive it.
Not just trusting they're going to find it on their own someday if the Lord leads them. You actually have to get out there and do a little bit of proselytizing.
You can't assume, because again, I'll go back to the cost, right? There's no cost to opposition right now. There's none. And so if there isn't a cost, then no wedge is going to do anything, because you haven't driven the wedge. You actually have to drive it. But I think on this issue and going forward, depending on how ascendant this crazy DSA communist wing of the party becomes, that those wedges will continue to appear, but they will have to be driven. And the Senate will have to work, and they will have to actually push on the issue in order for that to potentially be exposed, and to see what fractures might actually create coalitions for what you want.
I mean, yeah, that's the key in the other half of the scientific analogy there. I mean, if you actually want to split the log, the wedge has to be driven in with the sledgehammer. And so, again, that's pretty on point. Chip Wyatt, one of the fine directors over at Heritage Action for America, thanks for giving us a couple of minutes, walking us through some of the pathways that are forward, and also how those could kind of be made real instead of, dreaming. Okay, this last small thing. This one small extra thing at the end of the show here, this is for the crew. This is for those of you who know exactly why I am the way that I am. It is just a smidgen of bonus tonus just for y'all. So as you may recall, I made a statement on the show on Monday. And the statement that I made was about Amy Coney Barrett of the Supreme Court of the United States and why I had an issue with some of her rulings, where I think that comes from. Because again, John Roberts, he's a George Bush appointee, acts a lot like George Bush, but Amy Coney Barrett was picked by Trump. And all of these people said she was going to be super duper and good and conservative. And on some things, she is really, really conservative and she rules correctly. But on some things, especially regarding some matters of immigration enforcement, she has the tendency to rule kind of like, occasionally some garbage. Here was, just for those of you who have watched the show, for those of you who are part of the crew here, here's where this comes from. Just as a reminder. Why does Amy Coney Barrett suck as a Supreme Court justice? So there are two answers, one that will upset some people and one that will upset other people. Notre Dame University's law school sucks. And I got a lot of emails. I got a lot of text messages. I got one phone call. I got some angry tweets. Someone contacted me on Facebook Messenger. I think there was one angry Notre Dame Law School grad who got angry at me over on LinkedIn. It was a wonderful time. Notre Dame University's law school is awful. It produces mediocre lawyers. Mediocre lawyers. Now, I made it clear through kind of the rest of the video that particular rant, which if you're weird, you can go back and watch for some reason. But anywho, I made the case that Notre Dame has a great theological school. There are a lot of good people who have come out of Notre Dame's law school program. And there are a lot of great majors. Again, I grew up as a Fighting Irish fan. My dad, huge Fighting Irish football fan. I was more of an IU football fan, but I've always loved the Fighting Irish. It's very hard to be from Indiana and not love a lot of things about Notre Dame. However, the point that I made is that often, because it's Notre Dame and it's Catholic's little Harvard for law schools, it just so happens that they will vouch for people who have no business being vouched for. I was not expecting to be proved right in just a couple of days, but I'm not going to look that particular gift horse in the mouth. Enter in, of all people, the socialist, now Democrat nominee from Colorado's 1st, Melat Kiros, just so happens to get her law degree from Notre Dame University. The socialist, pro-Islamist, abolish ICE, abolish police, abolish private property, is also a mediocre person who comes from a mediocre law school that is only special because there are people within the denomination, that denomination of Christianity, that vouch for it. And again, every denomination's got this. Every one of them does. Don't get me wrong. It is, in fact, a thing. I happen to remember when I was at Maranatha Baptist University in Wisconsin that there were kids who were from more prominent parts of the circle who got treated better. It happens. It's annoying. Favoritism is an annoying part of the world. But I will absolutely die on the hill that, just like with a lot of Protestants who think that, although I love Hillsdale, Hillsdale is where the sun sets and rises, Catholics often do kind of the same thing with Notre Dame's law school, and that's not fair because there are far better law schools that produce phenomenal Catholic legal minds who are, again, for example, some other members of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is like one half Jewish, one half Catholic, and there's like sort of an evangelical in there, but they don't really count because, So, just saying that, like, if you are a young Catholic and you are going to go to a law school, make it a different law school than Notre Dame. Make it a different, there are a ton of others, and ask great Catholics. I would ask Matt Fradd where to go to, I would ask Michael Knowles where to go to law school. And then they tell you a number of law schools. I would ask other people at the Daily Signal. Ask them hey, as a Catholic, where would you go for law school? If you, but don't make it Notre Dame. Again, Notre Dame, a lot of other programs, excellent. But, no. Automac, here we are in Protestants versus Catholics again. No. Not Prots versus Catholics in that one. No, my friend. I am defending better Catholics and better Catholic programs than Notre Dame. The Notre Dame Law School, that's not a Catholic issue. That's a Notre Dame issue. And I say that as a Hoosier. That's like, could have clover, I could have shamrocks thrown at my house or something like that. So, now we're getting a lot of really excellent, phenomenal, very super and duper comments and suggestions in the comments section of better places to go. So those things all said, go USA. And above all, may every single communist and socialist find their way either to repentance, the border, or if they are, aggressive radicals, the doors to a helicopter. I'm Tony Kinnett, and this is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC. God bless and take care.